You have done this, and it has been so, so important for our families and our communities. And to parents, thank you for your support as well, even when things were very much in flux through many parts of this past year. It has not always been easy, but the adaptability, resilience, and strength of our school communities and our youth has really shone through here in BC. And finally, I want to say congratulations to those who are graduating this year. This is an experience that was much different, I'm sure, than you were expecting, but it is also something that you have overcome. And in successfully overcoming the obstacles that you did this year, that is something you will take with you for the rest of your life, and know that you have that strength and resilience when things get tough in your future. But I want to say congratulations. You've done an amazing job through a very challenging year, and I think that is reason to celebrate for everybody. Thank you very much. I'll now turn it over to, do you want to introduce, to Stephanie Higginson to say a few words.
Good morning. I'm honored to be on the territories of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples of the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations. And I too want to begin by acknowledging that the COVID-19 pandemic has been hard on all of us. It's been hard on communities, it's been hard on businesses, and it's been hard on families. It has been particularly difficult for children and youth who have lost connections to supports and sacrificed activities and experiences that so many of us remember so fondly from our own formative years. Schools are where we learn. They're where our early social and emotional learning takes place. They are also where we make lifelong connections to friends, to teachers, to mentors, to teams, and activities that shape our lives. In British Columbia, we have been fortunate. Boards of Education, in cooperation with the Ministry of Education and the Provincial Health Office, pulled out all the stops to keep students in school all year long to make sure that learners would benefit from the critical supports provided by schools. We are proud that British Columbia prioritized the health and well-being of children and youth by keeping schools open for the entire school year. Together, we proved that with the appropriate health and safety measures in place, education can and should be a priority even during a global pandemic. It was a monumental task that asked a lot of every person in this sector, and everyone rose to the challenge. And we did so because of how much we care for the students we serve. We are grateful to everyone for the sacrifices they made in recognition of the critical role schools play in the lives of students, communities, and society at large. Thank you to the dedicated staff across the entire K-12 sector who made all of this possible. Each and every one of you played an integral role in this extremely complicated but very successful school year. And thank you to the families and students who worked hard to comply with the safety measures that made this school year possible. It's been extraordinarily difficult, but it has been successful, and this year will set us up for a smoother transition into our recovery phase. And with hope on the horizon, we can look back and feel a tremendous sense of achievement at the incredible efforts we took to keep kids in school during this very challenging school year. Building on this same diligence and care, I am grateful and relieved to be here today delivering a message of hope based on the most up-to-date science that has guided BC so successfully through this pandemic. We are here today to signal the first careful steps towards a pandemic recovery school year. Boards of Education will continue to work with their local medical health officers to create return-to-school plans that parallel the province's staged recovery plan. Boards will work with the same thoughtfulness demonstrated this school year to meet the needs of students as we transition to a post-pandemic world. We recognize and we understand that the pandemic has impacted each community differently, and each Board of Education will build a COVID-19 recovery plan that meets the nuanced needs of the communities that they serve. Over the last year and a half, British Columbians in every community pulled together to keep each other safe. As we move forward, boards will continue working with their communities to keep kids learning, growing, and thriving in every part of the province. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And I'd now like to turn it over to Andrea Sinclair, the President of the BC Confederation of Parent Advisory Committees.
Good morning, and thank you, Minister Whiteside. I acknowledge I am speaking today from my home on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. I'm Andrea Sinclair, and I'm the President of the BC Confederation of Parent Advisory Councils. BC CPAC is the provincially mandated voice of parents who represents over 565,000 students attending public schools. I wish to thank our dedicated board and our CEO. Together, we have attended over 125 meetings since March 2020. I am proud to say BC CPAC has worked diligently to bring the parent perspective and voice to each committee and influence decisions and policies. As has already been noted, it has been a challenging year for us all. I understand these challenges firsthand as I have 2 children in high school. By working together, our schools have remained open and safe. By doing so, children were able to benefit from the social and emotional supports offered at their neighborhood school. It also meant our children were able to have consistency in their lives by ensuring that their daily routines would remain. By schools remaining open, it meant our children could continue to interact with peers and trusted adults. It also allowed our children to take advantage of the much needed supports like breakfast and hot lunch programs. As I took my place on the K-12 steering and restart committees, I was impressed with how hard parents, educators, support staff, healthcare experts, and ministry personnel worked as a team to ensure that schools met health and safety guidelines. I'm grateful to each of our education partners for their knowledge, effort, and dedication. Through this experience, I am more confident than before that our school system can overcome any adversity it may face. There is no substitute for the in-class experience, and that is why we support the K-12 recovery plan and the return to school in September, where all students can be back learning full-time in their classrooms. Children and families can expect that their school and school district will be prepared, responsive, and flexible in meeting individual student needs, including acknowledging and addressing impacts from the pandemic on learning, mental health, and well-being. It's been a time of adaptation for all of us, children, families, and school staff. It's now time for parents to return to our schools to help reinvigorate our communities. It's now time for parent advisory councils to re-engage with their families. It is important for us to share with families today so that they can plan and adapt for September, but also find time to rest, recharge, and reset over the summer. And as we look with hope to September and the near normal return to school, BC CPAC will continue working with our provincial education partners and the ministry throughout the summer to finalize the plans for September while continuing to take our lead from the PHO. We will keep members and families informed as information is available. We have listened and learned from each other. We have supported and leaned on each other. The phrase, "it takes a village," has never been truer. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those comments, Andrea. And now we have some time for questions.
Thank you very much, Minister. A reminder to reporters on the line, please press *1 to enter the queue. You are limited to 1 question and 1 follow-up. Please also ensure you come off speakerphone before asking your question. First question, we go to Lisa Yuzda, News 1130.
Good morning. I guess this is probably mostly for Dr. Henry. You know, while there are many people that are excited going back to school, there is a loud group of people who are still very worried and say that it isn't safe. And I'm just wondering at this point, is there anything more that you can say to reassure those people who say that there are not enough protections, that say the province hasn't done enough to improve air quality, and that things are being pushed too quickly when kids under 12 will not be vaccinated returning to school in the fall? Is there anything you can say to reassure those people who just have not been reassured yet and are still frightened?
Lisa, thanks for that question. Maybe I'll just start before handing it over to Dr. Henry, particularly around the question around ventilation and the investments that have been made. We have seen school districts invest significant sums of money in upgrading ventilation systems throughout this year. Those investments will continue, and we in fact have a ventilation committee where we have ministry staff working with educators and administrators to identify those areas where we still need to be making improvements. So that work is all ongoing, and we won't be really stopping any of that during the summer, so that we can prepare for a safe start in September. And I'll just turn it over to Dr. Henry for the rest.
Sure, and thank you. And, as you mentioned, ventilation is one of the important things that we've learned. And we've learned that there are some situations that are riskier than others. But in terms of schools, we put in a lot of restrictions, a lot of trying to reduce mingling, all of those things that we were sort of putting in place as much as we possibly could early on, and we've learned from that. We've learned that actually structured environments with children are not that risky, which is good. We've learned that transmission is rare in those settings when we have a structured setting like a school. When we reduce the numbers of people that are coming and going on an ongoing basis, that makes a difference. So we've taken all of those things that we've learned. But I think the most important thing that we have on our side going into next fall is the fact that we've protected so many people in our province and in our communities through vaccination. So having safe and effective vaccines affects everybody. It means that transmission doesn't happen in the ways that we've seen it happen in communities in the past few months. And that's what we will see going into the fall. We're confident in that. What we are learning is how long the vaccines protect for, and we have more information about that as we're going on. The fact that 2 doses is important. And even if young children are not immunized, we know that they, one, aren't going to be infected as often, that they are protected from the adults and older children around them being protected, and that they're less likely to have severe effects from COVID anyway. So it is important that we get all of the adults and older children immunized and with their 2 doses, and we're on track to have that happen well before September. So that gives us a lot of benefit going into this next year, and means that we can get back to a much more normal year. It doesn't mean it's going to be perfect. There are still things we don't yet know about how this virus transmits, about what's going to happen next respiratory season when we know these types of viruses, coronaviruses, spread more easily. So those are the things that we will continue to watch and work together. But it is reassuring that even through the peak of our 3rd wave, we had very little transmission. We had quite a lot of exposure events, and those were concerning, and we managed those. And the school teams worked very hard to make sure that transmission was still rare in the school setting.
Lisa, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, you mentioned going into the respiratory season in the fall. What might that look like? I mean, if you're giving up cohorts for the younger kids, those are obviously the ones that are going to be more at risk. Might it look like classes being sent home again, like with that kind of exposure notice? Are those things still going to happen? Like, what are things that are going to continue on to alert parents if there is concern in their kids' classes in schools?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Those are the things that we're working out with public health. So we will continue to do case management, understanding every case that's transmitted. We'll be also, we have started our overall surveillance. So very much like what we do for influenza, where we do systematic testing of people in the community with respiratory symptoms to understand what is it that is circulating in our communities. So in some communities, if we start to see transmission of COVID, we will take those measures and make sure that the communities are aware. And there may be that we need to step up screening. It may mean that some classes may need to make sure that children are staying home, and that they will be notifying families. So we'll be working with the schools, and it is probable. We have it every year where we have influenza clusters that happen in schools, and we'll be managing them the same way, working with every single school, every community. But what we don't expect to see is that need to widespread shut things down across the board, because most people being protected means that it's not going to spread in the same way.
Next question, Lisa Cardasco, Vancouver Sun.
Thank you. I'm wondering why there isn't anyone from the BC Teachers Federation with you for this announcement today.
We have, I have to say, I am extremely proud of the work that our government has done in working collaboratively with partners in all sectors across all ministries in government. In education, we have a provincial steering committee that is comprised of educators, the BCTF, the QP staff, administrators, trustees, parents, public health. And that group has worked together since last spring to keep this, to keep schools safe and keep them open. The work is very collaborative. We have ongoing groups addressing mental health issues, addressing ventilation. So the work that is done to support keeping kids in school has been extremely collaborative, and that's the way we'll continue as we prepare for the reopening in September.
Lisa, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, Dr. Henry, you say that, the school plan will be guided by evidence and data, but you yourself have said in the past that you aren't gathering as much information about schools and transmissions as you'd like. So how can parents trust that their children will be safe in school?
What I have said is that it is very challenging. We don't have microchips in every child and every teacher to be able to know exactly who transmitted to whom. But on a local level, an individual level, we have a lot of work that has been done by local public health officers, our school health officers, our teams working with schools. And we do have a good understanding of what was happening in schools across the province. And that means we've presented some of the studies. There was a very in-depth one done by Vancouver Coastal, another one done by Fraser Health, the two areas where we had the most transmission in communities, and that was reflected in exposure events that happened in schools. And those data are the same in both of those studies through two different periods of time that show that transmissions with the measures that we had in place in schools were very rare. So that is